Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The way North Carolina schools are graded is due for an update, so education leaders are examining new ways to rate them. They're looking at things like attendance and electives, even thinking skills, to determine what separates good schools from bad schools. WRAL education insider Emily Walkenhorst wrote about it at WRAL.com, and she joins us now. Emily, welcome.
Good to be here.
Emily, before we get into what's new, tell us about how schools are currently rated.
So the federal government requires all schools to be graded in some way, and they require test scores to be a part of that, growth measures to be a part of that, and progress for like English learners to be a part of that. And so North Carolina, they base everything around test scores. So it's 80% how well did students do on the state's standardized tests, and it's 20% a growth measure. So what growth is basically a measurement of how well a school's students did on a test compared to how well an algorithm predicted they would do on the test. And then they stack up everybody against each other, and then you get a growth score based on how well you did against other schools. So, but basically it all boils down to those standardized tests.
And state leaders say that's not a great way to measure them. Why is that?
Basically, the state superintendent, Catherine Truitt, and others at the Department of Public Instruction, they've consulted with a lot of stakeholders, different organizations, other educators, and they've basically concluded nobody really wants this. And the reason that they think that is partly because the standardized tests are only administered in about 40% of classes. So they don't actually reflect what most of the people in a school are actually doing on a given day. So that's one reason. Another reason is they correlate pretty strongly with socioeconomic status of a school's students. And so it doesn't really tell you as much about how well educators are doing in that school, but maybe more about a different challenge that the school faces.
So what are they doing to measure them better?
So Truitt formed a working group of stakeholders. So that's a lot of, people who work at education nonprofits, people who work at colleges, people who work in education in some capacity. And they're basically going over, different ideas that they've had, including the results of a survey that Education NC conducted on behalf of the Department of Public Instruction. So they're looking at things like how often students attend school, different electives that a school offers, how well a school seems to be preparing people for career and college after high school. They're also looking at things like critical thinking skills and communication.
So how do they measure things like communication and critical thinking skills and even career readiness?
I asked about that because it seemed odd to me. How do you measure whether somebody is using critical thinking skills? But they actually already do that in some way. So teachers use different rubrics because maybe a part of what they're doing is they want to measure whether students are picking up on certain skills, practicing certain things, when they read a book, when they do a certain activity. It's just that those rubrics aren't necessarily standardized across the state. So a teacher might have a rubric, and they might be able to say, well, the student is at this particular level. They seem to be using a lot of critical thinking skills. They seem to be communicating well with their peers. But what that rubric is might just depend on what the school is.
So how does this line up with what other states are doing?
So other states are including a lot more measures than what North Carolina is, at least among the neighboring states. So we know in Georgia, they do measurements like they'll measure how well a school is doing at closing different gaps. So, if test scores are lower for students from a certain demographic, maybe you can measure how well the school is at closing that gap. And then the other states around us measure things like attendance, career and college readiness. So basically, North Carolina is very focused on these standardized tests, but what you'll find across the country is a lot of states are expanding their idea of what makes a good school.
People have been talking about changing how schools are graded for years. Why are they looking at this now?
So there has been a lot of emphasis in the last few decades on standardized test scores, but you've also seen in the last several years an increase in fatigue over standardized tests. People saying there's too much testing. You have parents saying my kid takes too many tests. And so there has been a movement for a while. And now at the state, leadership level, they've basically just said, now seems to be the time. We've had, not every teacher teaches a course that has a standardized test score. Is it really useful? And, we're hearing from a lot of people who are more interested in career and technical education preparation. And this performance grade doesn't actually tell anybody what kind of a program the school has related to that or how successful that particular program is. So basically at the state level, they feel like the performance grade is just not providing an indicator to people of some of the things that they seem to really care about, which go beyond standardized tests.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about what teachers and parents want to change about school assessments. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst about how North Carolina grades its schools. Emily, these school ratings affect more than just decisions about funding, right?
Right. So they have a wide-ranging impact. It really just depends on who's looking at the grade, what they want to use for it. So you might have a real estate agent who sees that a school got a B or an A, and they want to use that to market the home they're selling. But you might also see people making that decision for themselves, just deciding they want their child to go to a school with a certain grade, and they might make a decision entirely about the town, the neighborhood they live in, based on that score.
So parents, people who own property have a vested interest in this. What do they want?
So parents did participate in the survey that Education NC conducted. And, basically the survey results indicated that people wanted to include a whole host of other metrics. They wanted to consider absenteeism. They wanted to consider career and college readiness. They wanted to consider critical thinking skills. They wanted to consider school safety, climate, basically anything that you might think of as something people value about their school. People wanted to see it measured.
And are any of those things being considered by the working group?
So the working group is considering a lot of those things. There are certain things that they've decided are probably not good measures. So student discipline is one thing they've pretty much said is off the table. And one of those reasons is it's just not a reliable measure. I mean, in you might end up, in fact, disincentivizing schools from disciplining students, or at least reporting discipline, if it carried too much weight as a measurement.
You reported that one of the things that this survey showed was that parents and teachers and educators wanted to keep per pupil spending out of that mix. Why is that?
So it was a pretty much universal majority agreement to not include that. And basically, that's just because it doesn't really tell you anything. So a school can have more funding because they're actually a part of maybe the Restart program, which is for low-performing schools. And so you get an influx of money for that program. You may also just get an influx of money because of special populations that you serve. It doesn't necessarily indicate, too much. I mean, you could have schools that perform at different levels based on how much per pupil spending is. And also, it's not necessarily a variable a school can control very much, because it all comes down to the state and the county and the federal government and how much money they're willing to spend. School systems cannot set their own budget. Counties have to approve that.
So what's the final product of this working group? What happens next?
So the working group actually wrapped up its meetings this past week. They met about 5 times, I believe, basically just trying to figure out what can we all agree on as something that needs to be measured. And then state officials are going to take that and they're going to basically find a way to measure those things. They're going to come up with a set of recommendations, and they're going to spend about the next year doing that. But before anything can become official, the state legislature needs to approve of it. The State Department of Public Instruction cannot do this without the legislature's approval. There has been a bill filed by Representative John Torbett of Gaston County, House Bill 26, that asked the Department of Public Instruction to submit a report by April of this year, showing what they've learned about what other states do for these grades, and to submit actual suggestions by February of 2024 on what they think a new school performance grade should be. So that bill has passed out of the Education Committee. It's onto the Rules Committee. And, we'll see if there's an appetite, to actually pass the bill this session and then come February of 2024 to actually pass what recommendations the state might make.
Well, I know you'll keep us updated. Emily, thank you.
Good to be here.
That's WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst. For her in-depth article on North Carolina school assessments, visit the education section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download, and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.
Leave a comment and share this video with your friends. With daily uploads, there will always be a conversation.